Sorry for the background noise. I have a heater running because I like not freezing to death. Hey kids, welcome back to the channel. I'm Uncle Frank and I hope that you are having a great day. In today's video, I would like to sit down and have a nice, relaxing conversation about the Force of Will, a trading card game. Especially because I think it's one of the more interesting card games on the market currently. And that in and of itself is interesting because if I ask a random store or a random player, a random collector, what card games are currently seeing print, I almost guarantee Force of Will is not one that'll come to most of their minds. And that's because it's kind of just sat in the background, accumulating players, accumulating its kind of own silent wealth. You see, Force of Will has been out stateside since 2013. And it has trudged along silently since then. It had a bit of a struggle in around 2015, 2016, that 2-year wall that so many TCGs experienced, but it managed to overcome that trouble and continue on to this day, releasing new sets, having its Grand Prix tournaments, and overall just being a very decent, very enjoyable trading card game. For those of you who know absolutely nothing about Force of Will, think of it as a kind of a merging of Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh! With the basic gameplay mechanics of Magic the Gathering and kind of the scale and anime art that Yu-Gi-Oh! Brings to the table, which is very fun. I feel like Force of Will has done a better job of codifying some of its keyword abilities just a bit better. It's a bit more experimental with regards to certain abilities. It's also a bit more conserved in others, but overall it does feel like what would happen naturally if someone who is a huge fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! And someone who is a big fan of Magic decided to make a card game combining what I think is the best of both worlds. The most innovating thing about Force of Will, in my opinion, is the fact that its mana pool is its own separate deck, rather than having it be lands that are shuffled into your only deck. Another area that Force of Will excels in is its kind of full art treatment for a lot of its more chase cards, especially the foiling. I mean, check out this textured foil here on this card. It's just absolutely beautiful, in my opinion. I know it doesn't really show up well on the camera, but when you're looking at this kind of thing in person, it really does just make this card stand out. Not just as a game piece, but as a collectible piece as well. When Force of Will first came out in the States, it took a bit of time to get kind of traction going, to get that initial player base going. And I feel like almost as soon as it got traction, it started experiencing some problems with overprinting on very small, very unplayable sets. Battle for Ataraxia comes to mind. Curse the Frozen Casket kind of comes to mind as well. It had a bit of a soft reboot, if I recall correctly, but the thing that I remember the most about Force of Will back then is just the fact that even with a lot of the problems it was facing at the time, there were still people who were willing to go just the extra mile to get those games in, because at the store I was in at the time, we had people traveling from almost an hour and a half away just to get in this one Force of Will tournament that happened twice a month. And that struck me as kind of impressive. Keep in mind, this was back in 2015-ish era. We had people who would travel from very far away just to get 3 to 4 hours of games in, That, to me, screamed of a game that had a very small but very dedicated fan base. And I feel like for a lot of the TCGs on the market, that's the most important thing, is having a very dedicated fan base. And even now, Force of Will does have that small but very strong set of players who I feel like are going to be with this game for a very long time, unless the company behind it, TCG Co., I think is what it's called now, if the company does make another big mess up, and I don't think they will, I think they could risk losing their core audience, but they've done such a good job of retaining these players that I believe personally that these guys will be around for a while. And there's a few ways I feel like Force of Will has kind of perfected their formula for sets. I mean, they don't spam out sets every few weeks like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh do, but instead they have a handful of sets that come out intermittently. They're very nice. It seems like they put a lot of time and effort not just into the sets, but also into the lore of the sets. That's right, Force of Will has a story, and you can follow along, read along online. I think there's a visual novel or a light novel or something like that you can read. I used to be into the Force of Will lore, but I haven't paid attention to that in years. But besides that, you know, there's also just the general sense of like real love for the community you get from the Force of Will game devs. You know, they put out these really fun trailers on YouTube. They host all kinds of fun little sessions. They give you a nice little previews what's to come, and they don't get embroiled in controversy like a certain other company does, which is also just relaxing and fun to see, you know? But really, what helps Force of Will just kind of chug along as strong as it has is the fact that it's just a good game that is really fun to play. And yeah, it experiments a lot. It makes mistakes. You know, they have to regularly update the ban list, and I feel like they take more risks than a lot of other companies would. I mean, check this out. This set, the Ghost in the Shell standalone complex set, was an absolute flop, but even with this kind of flop, there were still people who would just churn out just to play with these cards and build decks based on Ghost in the Shell. I have not built a Ghost in the Shell deck yet. I have all the cards for it, but haven't had an opportunity to get that together, you know? I don't know. What I'm trying to say is Force of Will has been a very fun game, and I haven't, like, seriously looked at the game other than for the purposes of buying and selling it for about 2 years. You know, I haven't played any games in a long time. I haven't looked at the lore in a long time. I haven't really, like, considered buying any cards for myself in a long time. But, you know, whenever I do think about Force of Will, I can't think of anything overtly negative to say other than the fact that they occasionally release dud sets. And that's fine for a TCG. You know, so what I'm trying to say is if you're able to find a Force of Will community near you, if you're able to find a store that holds tournaments, and if you're even the slightest bit curious, I do strongly recommend it as a game to play. It's relatively beginner friendly. It's extremely complex, but if you can get a good grasp on the basic rules and you find a deck that you like, I think that this is going to be a game that a lot of people will have a great time playing. Now, as for where I think Force of Will is going in the future, I think that unless something crazy happens, and again, I can't predict the future, but unless something crazy happens, I do feel like Force of Will in the next 10 years is going to look a lot like how it has in the last 10 years, with slow and steady set releases to a small but dedicated audience of people who really, really just enjoy this very cozy, very fun game. And I feel like if the community grows, Force of Will has a chance to become a really serious, highly sought after kind of collector's environment, because there are a lot of old Force of Will cards that are really cool. They just have really fun art and didn't have a whole lot of chances to be reprinted. So there's just that to think about. I don't think there's going to be like a huge buying frenzy on them or anything. I just think that there's going to be a lot of really cool old cards people might want, you know? But besides that, yeah, you know, closing thoughts. Good card game. I think it's going to be around for a long time because it's been around for a long time, and there's really no reason to think that that's going to change. Anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing, sharing this video with a friend, leaving a comment, liking, all that jazz, and remember, your uncle needs to get healthy, so for every like this video receives, I will do a push-up in the next one. I'll see you kids then. My last video got 19 likes. That's 19.